James Cook University has sacked a marine scientist, Professor Peter Ridd, after he questioned claims by other scientists that global warming was destroying the Great Barrier Reef. Follows a pattern, I'm afraid. We have already seen other academics punished after questioning global warming alarmism. The late Professor Bob Carter, he was one of the first scientists to point out that global warming had in fact paused for most of this century. Carter then lost his position as Professor Emeritus at the same James Cook University, cost-cutting, they claimed. Then there was Professor Bjorn Lomborg, once listed by Time magazine as one of the world's 100 most influential people. He was banned from teaching at 2 Australian universities for pointing out that most global warming schemes actually waste money without changing the climate a jot. And now Peter Ridd has paid the price, after saying this on Sky News last August.
Shouldn't we now start to check some of this environmental science, where in addition to the normal problems that we have with poor quality, we also potentially have scientists with an ideological bent? James
Cook University then charged Ridd with misconduct, ordered him to shut up about the actions it was taking against him, then sacked him when he wouldn't. I spoke with former Prime Minister Tony Abbott about this and the future of the Liddel coal-fired power plant earlier. Tony Abbott, thank you so much for your time. How can AGL go from saying last year that this Liddel power station, worthless piece of junk, to now refusing a bid of $250 million plus workers' entitlements, plus remediation work, plus? Why won't Liddel sell?
Well, Andrew, you said earlier this was a shameful day for the Australian academia. I think it's also been a shameful day for Australian business, because here you have a major Australian business, AGL, which is refusing to deliver to consumers affordable, reliable power, the best possible product. Instead, it's choosing to deliver to consumers much more expensive power, much less reliable power, but power which is subsidised increasingly. And I think that's shameful for AGL. It may well be in the short-term interests of AGL shareholders, but it's certainly against the long-term interests of our people and our country. And that's why I think it would be for the good of everyone if the government were to compulsorily acquire this power station and then on-sell it to Alinta. That way we would keep the power station open and the government wouldn't be in the business of managing a business itself.
As you say, it's in Alinta's interest to take all this power out of the system and then, with the shortage caused, enjoy higher prices for its other products. But listen, why did the government reject your suggestion to compulsorily buy this Liddel power station and then sell it on to Alinta?
Well, that's a question that you really should address to government ministers. As is well known, Andrew, I'm a backbencher, and backbenchers have freedom to make these sorts of policy suggestions. You see, one of the good things about the government getting firmly behind coal-fired power generation is that it would open up a very sharp policy distinction between the Coalition and the Labor Party. As you know, Andrew, winning elections is not about minimising differences, it's about maximising differences. And I would like to see the Coalition as the party of coal-fired power generation, as the party of low power prices, and leave the Labor Party as the party of unreliable wind and solar and the party of high power prices. That's the best way for us to maximise our chances of winning the election.
But what difference do you think this would actually make to power prices if the government did force the sale via of Alinta to another company that would keep it open for a few more years?
There's absolutely no doubt that the cheapest form of baseload power generation is coal. Gas is about 20 to 50% more expensive depending on the type, and solar and wind really can't effectively compete because when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, they don't actually generate. So if we want baseload power, we really have to maintain a very strong level of coal-fired power generation, and by doing what I'm suggesting, compulsorily acquiring Liddel and then immediately on selling it to Alinta, which would then operate it, a private business would then continue to operate it, we are sending a very strong signal that we support coal-fired power generation. And let's face it, we export coal. It's one of our 3 biggest exports. It's one of the mainstays of our economy, our export economy. And if it's right to burn coal for power overseas, it's right to continue to burn coal for power here.
But one of the criticisms made by a number of Liberals is that, look, intervening in a market like this, nationalising, at least initially,
that criticism
the coal-fired...
doesn't stand up, Andrew.
Well, they say that's against free market principles. What's your answer?
This is a government which is already intervening very heavily in the market. It recently spent about $6 billion to acquire the shares in Snowy Hydro to go ahead with something called Snowy 2.0. I'm not against that. I think that's a sensible way forward, all things considered. But if it's right for the government to own and operate Snowy 2.0, it can't be wrong in principle to do the same with Hazelwood 2.0 or Liddell 2.0. But in this particular case, it wouldn't actually be necessary for the government to own and operate the station, given that there's a practised power generator, an experienced existing power generator, Alinta, which is happy to take over Liddell, provided AGL will sell. Now, the only way we can get AGL to sell, given the announcement today, is for the government to take some active measures. Now, I want to stress the villain here is not the government. The villain is, in the first instance, AGL, and the villain is, in the second instance, Bill Shorten and the Labor Party, which would make a bad situation much, much worse. And by taking strong measures to protect coal-fired generation in this country, we would set up an election contest between the Coalition as the party of low power prices and coal-fired generation, and Labor as the party of unreliable renewable energy and high power prices. And I think that's a contest that we can win.
Well, I don't know that you can call AGL the villain, given, you know, that's inherent in capitalism, to maximise the return to your shareholders, given the legislative and commercial realities confronting you. The government makes the rules. The government didn't intervene to stop the purchase of Liddell by AGL. AGL's entitled to make some money here. But I'm just wondering, it's really up to the government. It's
also the job of a business. Andrew, it's the job of business to deliver goods and services in the most effective and the least expensive way possible. And a business which sells things to people at a higher price than necessary, which sells an inferior good to people because it would help its shareholders, is, I think, guilty of a grave dereliction of its duty.
No, but all this is, of course, Band-Aid stuff until we really challenge the science, or the so-called science, that claims that burning coal is killing the planet imminently. Don't you think it is time for a royal commission into the state of global warming science, and, you know, with sceptics and the believers on an equal footing, so that we finally sort this out?
That's an interesting suggestion, Andrew, and as you know, I've said that certainly climate change happens. The Ice Age is an obvious example of extreme climate change, but the Ice Age had absolutely nothing to do with anything that humankind had done. The question is, what contribution, if any, does mankind make to climate, and what is the sensible policy response to this contribution? Now, as you know, I'm all in favour of no regrets measures to limit our emissions, but I said in opposition, I said in government, and I now say as a backbencher, by all means limit emissions, but don't do it in ways which send our cost of living through the roof, which destroy our industries, which jeopardise jobs, and which run completely counter to the obvious interest we have in continuing our vigorous, indeed our booming coal export industry.
But we need to do something like a Royal Commission, I would have thought. I know it sounds extreme, but to get to the bottom of some of this, given the difficulty there is in academics speaking out without getting sacked or marginalised or booted off campus. What do you make of the sacking of Peter Ridd?
And I take... Look, it is disgraceful. I have no reason to think that he hasn't done his teaching and his research in a highly competent and professional manner. He happens to question the politically correct orthodoxy about dangerous man-made global warming. As you say, as you said earlier, if we can't have debate, we can't have true science, because true science is not what 98% of scientists vote for. True science is what corresponds with the actual facts out there, and that's what we have to get to the bottom of.
By the way, that survey that you referred to, that 98% or 97%, is in fact widely discredited. I'll just point that out for anyone seizing on that. By the way, Tony Abbott, the ABC now seems off the leash, at war with this Turnbull government, as it was with yours, and over a tiny, tiny $20 million a year cut to a budget of $1 billion a year. Its bias is also plainly obvious, refusing even to say sorry for calling a Conservative politician the C word. What do you think needs to be done about the ABC? It's got 5 national radio stations, 4 national TV stations, too scary, too big to challenge.
Well, I certainly support the government's latest decision to trim the ABC's funding, and I think a government that is looking for savings could certainly cut much deeper and harder where the ABC is concerned. I accept, Andrew, that I did break a promise made pre-election not to cut ABC funding, but then in December 2014 I did cut the ABC funding. I applied an efficiency dividend to it for the first time in many years, and I said at the time, yes, under the circumstances we came to the conclusion that that was a commitment that we couldn't keep. And look, I support what the government has done here. I'm appalled that when the ABC was found recently by the independent adjudicator to have breached its own charter in respect of a report about me, not a word of regret or apology, and if they don't want to apologise to me, fair enough, but they should at least apologise to their viewers for breaking their own charter. I noticed that on the same day that it was revealed that they'd broken their own charter, they appointed a former Greens candidate to run their social media operation. This is not, in many respects, a fair and impartial media operation. In many respects, the ABC is a campaigning unit for the Green left, and I think people are right to be concerned about it.